Oh, I thought love was only true in fairy tales, meant for someone else but not for me. Oh, love was out to get me. Well, that's the way it seemed. Disappointment haunted all my dreams. I'm a believer, said I'm a believer. I'm a believer, said I'm a believer. I am a believer. That's the good news. And I'm not just a believer, but I'm trying to take on a new hopefulness here, because I do believe there is a sense and a meaning to everything. And one of the things that we have to make sense of, at least I do, is circumcision, which seems like the craziest of all subjects for me to cover. But I think if you take a moment to look at it from what I've learned, you'll see that it's a very important part of what makes up a man's, well, at least a circumcised man's, personality. It's a trauma. And so to talk about this, I'm going to start quickly with a clip here from the Psychedelic Science Conference that I went to in 2017. And when I went to the conference, there was a speaker there, and I think I've done a video on this from the, I think it was the London College, and she'd done a very excellent presentation on psilocybin is a treatment for treatment-resistant depression. And the way she positioned it was so, it just clicked for me. And so I'm going to play you what I recorded immediately after that session. Welcome everybody, Bob Burke here from the Otera Conference in Viroqua, Wisconsin. If I were to ask myself personally what one issue, what one healthcare item has most affected my life and my family, it would have to be depression. What depression appears to be is a mode of thinking which challenges us to have positive interactions in our life. We're stuck usually on an event. It could be traumatic, it could be a death, it could be a loss in the family, it could be the breakdown of a family relationship. But what happens is that the neurons, as we experience this, begin to align to make that memory and that experience more accessible. It's sort of like a NASCAR driver. You know, they don't think about actually turning and driving the car. The car is actually being driven by them, but because they have done it so often and built the neural pathways of memory, they do it unconsciously. The same is true when it comes to addiction, and the same thing is exceptionally true with depression. In many ways, we do create the ongoing event by, well, if you will, by spending time stuck on that issue. And then once you're in that issue's groove, if you will, the brain continues to build up rapid firing that allows it to easily be accessed. So someone who becomes depressed will continue to be depressed almost no matter what they do. What we've learned about psychedelics is that they release those, if you will, quick-firing chemicals that help make that so automatic, so that your brain doesn't just fire on that signal. It allows your brain also, because of the chemicals, it allows the brain to access other parts of your brain that think differently, and allows you to look at the situation that's holding you back and create a new pathway. That new pathway allows you to move beyond the depression. And I think that if you spend a little time looking at her information about how it's used with a number of illnesses, but I think specifically this fits any illness that we could describe as a software issue, an event that happened in your life, or a series of events, or a culmination that impacted your ability to live an ongoing and normal life. We see this, unfortunately, when you have a child that dies. We see it when you have someone in the family who is an alcoholic. You see it in families that struggle with how to have a normal relationship, oftentimes because there is an underlying damage to the thinking that begins when they're very young. So we have the implication that there is a process within the brain and that a trauma can put this process into motion. Psilocybin can also put this process into motion. But since psilocybin isn't regularly used by the general population, that means that most of our personality traits are functions of a trauma. That is, we had a normal, happy state of being, and then something traumatized us. Now, what the implications of even that are is it means that it creates a change in behavior. It changes the preferences of the individual, right? So somebody who had an absolutely normal sex life and is raped will not have a normal sex life. Why would you think someone whose penis is traumatized at birth would then have a normal view of sex? It's not to say that it has to be wildly off, but we want to look at things that are broadly systemic, things that I participated in, that we all participate in. And this is one of them, right? So what does circumcision do? And, so I've been looking around, and I'll be honest, Meta AI is actually a fairly useful tool for asking some fairly straightforward questions. And so I asked Meta AI, first of all, what is the origin of circumcision? So how far does this go back and why?
Circumcision has its origins in ancient cultures and religions, with evidence of the practice dating back to around 4000 BCE. The earliest recorded evidence of circumcision comes from ancient Egypt, where it was performed for both religious and medical reasons. In Judaism, circumcision is a central ritual known as Brit Milah, which is performed on male infants when they are 8 days old. This practice is believed to have originated around 1500 BCE and is a sign of the covenant between God and the Jewish people.
So why do we do it? Why do we circumcise? It's a covenant between God and his people. And when we look at the covenant between God and his people, we're really talking about the demiurge. We're not talking about the big G God. That's us. That's our consciousness. We're talking about the little g God. And the little g God has used this cult ritual, right? So Peter Levenda says that all religion is cargo cult religion. And I'm going to pull the cargo off of it. That was just sort of how we discovered that the phenomenon exists. These are just cults. We are trapped in cults, and the cults have their own goals. They have their own agenda. And one of those agendas, believe it or not, is to use circumcision as a way to create a behavioral modification in men. And so cutting the foreskin of the men at birth is very much like castrating a pig, except in reverse. Whereas you castrate a pig so that the pig doesn't mate, and of course with all the things that go with that. But when you castrate the pig, the purpose is in part that they not mate with other pigs. Opposite of that is circumcision. And the trauma to the penis during a circumcision causes a nectin-3 adhesion to occur in the brain. First of all, the pain of the trauma causes the wipe down. That causes the release of the MMP9. And, so the question I asked next, I said, Meta AI, first of all, there may or may not have been pains. Hey, in 1969, was there anesthesia for circumcisions?
Was a local anesthetic used in circumcisions done in hospitals in 1969? Meta AI. In 1969, local anesthesia was not typically used for circumcisions performed in hospitals. During that time, circumcisions were usually performed using general anesthesia or no anesthesia at all, as the procedure was often seen as a quick and relatively painless surgery. However, it's important to note that anesthesia practices varied among hospitals and medical professionals, so it's possible that some physicians may have used local anesthesia in certain cases, but generally, local anesthesia was not the standard practice for circumcisions in 1969.
And so the answer is that, much like today, it's fairly unlikely that any anesthesia was used. So if there is pain during this procedure, then I, like all men, all baby boys, experience this pain. Now, how much pain is there? So once again, I went to Meta AI and I said, are there studies about circumcision and the amount of pain a child senses?
Are there studies about circumcision and the amount of pain a child senses? Meta AI. Yes, there have been studies on circumcision and pain perception in infants. Research suggests that newborns do feel pain during circumcision, and that the procedure can be painful. Some studies have measured the physiological responses of infants, such as heart rate, blood pressure, and cortisol levels, which indicate stress and pain. Others have used behavioral responses, like facial expressions and crying, to assess pain. A 1997 study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, found that newborns undergoing circumcision without anesthesia showed significant changes in heart rate, blood pressure, and cortisol levels, indicating stress and pain. A 2006 study published in the Journal of Pain found that infants who received a local anesthetic cream during circumcision had reduced pain responses compared to those who did not receive the anesthetic. The American Academy of Pediatrics, AAP, acknowledges that circumcision can be painful and recommends the use of pain relief measures, such as topical anesthetics or nerve blocks, to minimize discomfort. It's important to note that the extent to which an individual infant senses pain during circumcision can vary, and that the long-term effects of circumcision on pain perception are not fully understood.
The long-term effects of circumcision on pain perception are not fully understood. Bullshit. Bullshit. And bullshit. Circumcision is done as a culling process. It is done to affect the behavior on a broad scale. We should stop immediately traumatizing little children with this. In Africa, if you want to know how close this is, in Africa, circumcision is done as men enter adulthood. Well, what changes in adulthood? Well, you begin to mate, as well as other things within the tribe. But the big one that has to do with your penis is you start mating. Circumcision is meant to create an increased desire once you realize this thing doesn't have to hurt. And that's the manipulation that we deal with that keeps us so distracted. If you don't believe me that it's a wide distraction in our culture, then you clearly don't know that the largest industry for entertainment in America is pornography, not the NFL. That's how important it is to understand what circumcision has done to not just me, but to all of us. And so I didn't agree to be a part of a cult. You didn't agree to be part of a cult. But we are living in a culture that is controlled by a cult. And that cult says that we should traumatize little baby boys. So, if you will, there I was, all 5 pounds, 7 ounces of my soaking life, experiencing the physical trauma of circumcision. And then probably after a little while, I don't know how long, maybe a day, I have no idea for sure, I could check. But after a short period of time, I was taken away from the familial status of my mom. And we don't know what sort of consequences that has to a person either. We're going to talk about a couple of experiences in my life about that. Thank you very much, everyone, and peace out. Well, then I saw her face.